Sign the $12 million house over to your brother.
You're asking me to give away the home I spent my entire life building?
It should have been mine anyway.
You owe your brother this.
Sign the $12 million house over to your brother, my mother ordered. But what would you do if the people who raised you suddenly demanded the home you sacrificed your entire life to build? Would you sign, or finally make them face the truth? My name is Marin, and that morning, I sat across from my mother and brother, staring at a deed they expected me to sign. My hands were shaking, but not because I was afraid. I was remembering every sacrifice they had forgotten. Then my mother pushed the pen toward me and whispered, "You owe your brother this." I picked it up. I kept the pen between my fingers, staring at the deed while my mother's words echoed in my head. "You owe your brother this." What she didn't understand was that I had already given my brother more than I could count. My name is Marin Vale, and I was 32 that morning. I had spent most of my adult life believing that if I worked hard enough, stayed responsible enough, and never caused trouble, my family would eventually see me for who I really was. I was wrong. Growing up, I was always the dependable daughter. If something went wrong, my parents called me. If a bill needed paying, they called me. If Kier made a mistake, somehow I was expected to help fix it. Kier, my younger brother, was treated differently. My mother always said he had a big heart, even when his choices caused problems. I was the one expected to be practical. I was supposed to understand. I was supposed to sacrifice. And I did. For years. I worked through college, took extra jobs, and saved every dollar I could. While other people my age were traveling and enjoying their 20s, I was building a career in luxury interior design. There were nights when I came home so exhausted that I ate dinner standing beside my kitchen counter because I didn't have the energy to sit down. But I kept going. Eventually, that sacrifice paid off. My company became successful, and I finally bought the home I had dreamed about for years. A breathtaking $12 million estate surrounded by trees, with enormous windows, private grounds, and enough space to breathe. I remember the first evening I stood alone on that terrace. I cried. Not because of the price. Because for the first time in my life, I could look around and say, I did this. I thought my family would be proud. Instead, when my mother first visited, she barely looked at me. She walked through the rooms, opened closets, examined the guest bedrooms, and finally asked, "How many people could live here?" I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Kier started asking whether he could use the property for business meetings. My mother began saying things like, "A house this big is wasted on one person." At the time, I ignored those comments. I wish I hadn't, because now, sitting across from them with that deed in front of me, I finally understood what those questions had really been about. They weren't admiring my home. They were measuring how much of my life they could take. By the time I understood what my mother's questions really meant, the problem was no longer just the house. It was Kier. My younger brother had always been good at making people believe that everything was under control. He dressed well, talked confidently, and somehow always had a new business idea. But behind that confidence was a growing pile of financial problems. Kier had started a luxury construction company and convinced everyone that it was going to make him rich. At first, I wanted to believe him too. Then one afternoon, he called me. His voice sounded different. He told me the company was short on cash and needed one final investment to survive. My mother called me that same evening. "He just needs a little help, Marin. You're his sister." That little help turned into $85,000. I transferred the money because I believed I was helping my brother get back on his feet. Kier promised he would repay every dollar. He never did. A few months later, I discovered he had bought an expensive vehicle and continued spending money as if nothing had happened. When I confronted him, he told me I was being dramatic. My mother defended him. "You know how stressful business can be," she said. I let it go. But when Kier asked me for more money, I finally said no. That was when my mother's attitude toward me changed. She accused me of having plenty while my own brother was struggling. Then the comments about my house became more frequent. "You don't need all that space. Kier has a family to think about. You could always move somewhere smaller." One evening, my mother went even further. She told me Kier could use my property as security for a business loan. I stared at her. "My house." She sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "You wouldn't actually lose it. It's just collateral." That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. A few days later, I received a call from Nolan, the attorney who had helped me with my property documents. His voice was unusually serious. Marin, I need to ask you something. Did you authorize anyone to discuss transferring your estate? My stomach dropped. No. There was a long pause. Because someone contacted a legal office claiming you had already agreed to transfer the property to Keir. I couldn't speak. Then Nolan sent me a copy of the paperwork. I opened the file. There was Keir's name, and beneath it was a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. That was when I realized my family wasn't simply asking for my house anymore. They had already started planning how to take it. I stared at the copy Nolan had sent me, unable to take my eyes off the signature. For a few seconds, I wanted to call my mother. I wanted to demand an explanation. I wanted to hear Keir admit what they were doing. But Nolan stopped me. Don't confront them yet. His voice was calm. First, let's find out how far this has gone. So I listened. The next morning, I met Nolan privately. We went through every document connected to my estate, every authorized contact, and every recent inquiry involving the property. Then we found something that made my stomach turn. Keir had been telling people that I had promised to give him the house. He had even spoken to a lender about using my property as security for a large business loan. He was planning his financial future around a house he didn't own. And my mother had been helping him sell that story. For the first time, I understood why they had been pushing me so hard. They weren't thinking about what happened to me. They were already treating my house like Keir's solution. Nolan helped me secure everything properly. We reviewed my ownership records, changed the necessary contacts, and preserved copies of every suspicious message and document. He also told me not to reveal what I knew. So I didn't. When my mother called, I acted normal. When Keir mentioned the house, I didn't argue. I simply listened. That was harder than I expected. For years, I had reacted to my family's pressure by explaining myself, defending my choices, and trying to make them understand how much their behavior hurt me. But now I stopped. I wasn't going to fight them with emotion. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. Then Nolan called me again. They've scheduled a family meeting, he said. I asked what it was about. His answer was simple. The final transfer of your house. I sat silently for several seconds. They really believed I was going to surrender. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I would let them believe it. The family meeting was scheduled for the following Friday at a private law office across town. After Nolan told me they were calling it the final transfer, I spent the next few days pretending nothing had changed. My mother called twice to remind me to bring identification. Keir sent me a message saying, "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." That sentence told me everything. They weren't inviting me to discuss my property. They believed the decision had already been made. When I walked into the conference room, my mother and Keir were already sitting together on one side of the table. They looked strangely relaxed. A folder sat in front of them. My name was printed across the top. Della smiled when I sat down. "We're doing this for Keir," she said. I looked at her. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" She pushed the folder toward me. "You're transferring the estate to your brother. He'll take care of the taxes and expenses, and you'll have plenty of money to buy another house." I couldn't believe how casually she said it. My home. 10 years of sacrifice. Reduced to something I could simply replace. I looked at Keir. "And what happens to me?" He shrugged. "You'll be fine, Marin. You have a successful business." My mother nodded. "You don't need that much." Something inside me went quiet. I remembered the nights I had worked until midnight. The cheap meals. The missed vacations. The years I had saved while everyone else told me I was being too careful. Then I asked Keir one question. "Are you planning to repay the $85,000 you already owe me?" His smile disappeared. My mother immediately interrupted. "That's not what we're here to discuss." "Why not?" I asked. Nobody answered. I knew then that they weren't interested in fairness. They wanted my signature. So I leaned back and said the words they had been waiting to hear. "I need some time to think." Della's expression softened instantly. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "I knew you'd do the right thing." I almost laughed. Outside the building, Nolan was waiting. I told him everything. He listened quietly before saying, "Good. Let them believe you're surrendering." I looked back at the office doors. For years, I had tried to convince my family that I deserved respect. Now I was going to stop convincing them. I was going to show them the truth instead. And Nolan had just discovered one more piece of evidence that could change everything. The moment I told Nolan that my family believed I was going to surrender, he looked at me seriously. "Then we need to know exactly what they're hiding." Over the next few days, Nolan dug deeper into the paperwork surrounding Kier's business and the attempted transfer of my estate. What he found was worse than I expected. Kier wasn't simply struggling. He was drowning. His company owed millions to lenders, suppliers, and other creditors. The $12 million estate wasn't just something he wanted. It was the solution he had been counting on. Nolan showed me records proving that Kier had already told lenders he expected to receive my property. My hands went cold. He had been presenting my house as part of his future financial plan before I had agreed to anything. Then Nolan showed me another document. It was the supposed agreement claiming I had voluntarily promised to transfer the estate. I looked at the signature. It was mine, but I knew I had never signed that document. Nolan explained that the signature appeared to have been copied from an older document I had legitimately signed years earlier. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My own brother had allowed my signature to be used to make it look like I had agreed to something I never approved. I wanted to call Kier immediately. Nolan stopped me. Let the evidence speak for you. So we gathered everything. Proof that I own the estate. Records showing the $85,000 I had already given Kier. Evidence of his financial problems. Copies of the suspicious transfer documents. Messages showing how my mother and brother had discussed my property. I wanted everything documented before the final meeting. Then I made one decision Nolan didn't expect. I told him I wanted to offer Kier another property. Months earlier, I had purchased a smaller home that could comfortably accommodate his family. It wasn't worth anything close to $12 million, but it was a real opportunity for him to start over. Nolan looked at me carefully. Why would you give him anything after this? I answered honestly. Because I want to know what he really wanted. The next morning, my mother called. The papers are ready, she said. Bring your identification and your pen. I looked at the evidence spread across my desk. Then I replied calmly. I'll be there. This time, I wasn't walking into that room as the daughter they expected to control. I was walking in prepared. The next morning, I arrived at the law office with Nolan beside me and every document we had collected secured in a folder. My mother and Kier were already there. The moment Della saw me, she smiled. You came prepared to do the right thing. I said nothing. I sat down and looked at the deed in front of me. Kier leaned back confidently, as if the $12 million property already belonged to him. My mother began talking about family. She reminded me of everything my parents had supposedly sacrificed for me. Then she turned the conversation toward Kier. He has children, Marin. He needs stability. Kier nodded. You have your business. You'll be fine. I looked at him. And what about everything I sacrificed to buy that house? My mother frowned. You can always buy another one. Those words hurt more than I expected. They made it clear that none of them understood what the property represented to me. It wasn't just a house. It was 10 years of my life. Every late night. Every sacrifice. Every dollar I had saved when I could have spent it. Kier suddenly leaned forward. You've always acted like you're better than everyone because you made something of yourself. I stared at him. If this house means so much to you, why didn't you ever ask me how I felt about giving it away? He didn't answer. My mother immediately stepped in. Enough. Sign the papers. I looked down at the deed. My hands began to shake. For a moment, I remembered standing on that terrace for the first time, looking over the property and realizing I had finally built something that belonged completely to me. Then I reached for the pen. Fine. Kier smiled. My mother exhaled in relief. I signed. Kier immediately reached for the document. But Nolan placed his hand over it. That isn't the deed. The room went silent. My mother stared at him. What? I slowly pushed another document toward Kier. You wanted something from me, I said. But you're not getting my house. The document required Kier to formally acknowledge that he had no ownership claim over my estate. It also offered him the smaller property I had purchased, but only if he accepted responsibility for his debts and permanently released any claim against my $12 million home. Kier stared at the pages. For the first time that morning, he looked afraid. Kier kept staring at the document as if the words might somehow change. My mother was the first to speak. This isn't what we agreed to. I looked at her calmly. No, it's what I agreed to. Kier picked up the papers and began reading every page. His expression changed when he reached the section requiring him to accept full responsibility for his business debts and formally release any claim to my $12 million estate. Then he looked at me. You planned this? I shook my head. No, you planned to take my house. I simply stopped you. My mother immediately accused me of humiliating my own brother. You're his sister. You should help him. I finally looked directly at her. I already did. I reminded her about the $85,000 I had given Kier. The money I had never received back. The years of excuses. The calls asking me to fix problems I didn't create. And every time I helped, I said, "You told me it wasn't enough." Nobody spoke. Then I explained why I had offered Kier the smaller property. It wasn't because I believed he deserved my money. It was because I wanted to give him one real chance to rebuild his life without depending on mine. The property was large enough for his family. It could give him stability. But there was one condition. He had to stop pretending my success was his safety net. Kier became angry. "You set me up." "No," I said quietly. "You set yourself up when you built your future around something you didn't own." His lawyer reviewed the documents and explained the reality to him. If Kier refused, he would have to face his financial problems without the property he had been counting on. He finally lowered his eyes. For the first time, there was no confidence left in his voice. He signed. My mother began crying. "You've destroyed this family." I felt the old guilt trying to return. But I didn't let it. Family isn't supposed to mean one person gives up everything so another person never has to face consequences. Kier took the smaller property's documents. I kept my estate. But when I walked out of the office, I didn't feel like I had won. I felt tired. That evening, I returned to my house. For the first time, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt like freedom. The quiet feeling I had when I returned home didn't last long. The next morning, I found an envelope waiting for me. There was no message from Kier. It was from my mother. Inside was another document. Della claimed it proved I had promised years ago to support Kier financially for the rest of his life. For a few seconds, I simply stared at it. After everything that had happened, I couldn't believe they were still trying. I sent a copy to Nolan without responding to my mother. He reviewed it carefully and quickly found the problem. The document had never been properly witnessed or legally completed. It wasn't a valid agreement. It was another piece of paper my mother was trying to use to make me feel responsible for Kier. That was when I realized something important. They weren't going to stop because they suddenly understood me. They would stop only when I stopped allowing their pressure to control my decisions. Meanwhile, Kier's financial situation began changing. Without access to my estate, he had to face the debts he had created himself. His business was forced to restructure, and the lifestyle he had built around borrowed money began disappearing. I didn't celebrate any of it. I simply stayed out of it. Then my father called. He had barely spoken during the entire fight. Now his voice sounded different. He admitted that he had known about the plan to transfer my property. I closed my eyes. That hurt more than I expected. I could have understood if he had disagreed with me. What I couldn't understand was watching him know what they were planning and saying nothing. He asked if there was any way to repair our relationship. I told him the truth. Maybe someday, but not by pretending none of this happened. For the first time, I set clear boundaries with my family. No more financial rescues. No more conversations about my property. No more guilt. No more decisions made for me. A few days later, Kier contacted me. I expected another demand. Instead, he apologized. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for the house. He simply admitted that he had been wrong. I didn't forgive him immediately. I told him an apology wasn't enough. "If you really mean it," I said, "show me." There was a long silence. Then Kier told me something about our childhood that I had never known. And suddenly, I understood that the problem had started long before my $12 million house ever existed. Kier's confession changed the way I saw our entire childhood. He told me that Mom had spent years comparing us. Whenever I succeeded, she reminded him that he needed to catch up. Whenever he failed, she told him that I would always be there to help him. Over time, Kier stopped seeing my success as something I had earned. He started believing that because we were family, some of it belonged to him. That didn't excuse what he had done, but it helped me understand how he had become so entitled. The legal fight eventually ended. I kept my $12 million home. Kier kept the smaller property, but he also kept responsibility for the debts he had created. For the first time, he had to rebuild his life without expecting me to rescue him. My mother lost the control she once had over me. Our family didn't suddenly become perfect. I didn't pretend everything was forgotten. Instead, I created boundaries. No more giving money because someone made me feel guilty. No more sacrificing my future to fix someone else's mistakes. No more allowing family to decide what I should do with something I had worked so hard to build. Months later, Keir sent me his first repayment toward the $85,000 he owed me. It wasn't much, but I knew it mattered. He wasn't asking for anything. He was finally trying to stand on his own. Eventually, we met for coffee. I told him I didn't know if we'd ever be as close as we once pretended to be. But I'm willing to see what happens if we stop using money as proof of love. He apologized again. This time, he didn't ask for forgiveness. That meant more than any promise. I thought back to the morning my mother pushed the deed toward me. Sign the $12 million house over to your brother. I did sign something, but I didn't give Keir my house. I gave him responsibility. And I gave myself something even more valuable, a life that belonged completely to me. Standing on my terrace that evening, I finally understood. I hadn't taken anything from my family. I had simply stopped giving away pieces of myself. And for the first time, that was enough. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do is stop proving your worth to the people who should have valued you all along. Maren didn't destroy her family that day. She simply stopped allowing them to control her life. And maybe that's the kind of revenge that matters most. Protecting your peace and refusing to sacrifice yourself for someone else's comfort. If you were in Maren's place, would you have signed the deed or fought back? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched you, subscribe for more emotional family betrayal stories, powerful comebacks, and unforgettable moments. I'll see you in the next story.